Welcome everyone. It is a joy to have all of you with us today for the Love Your Brain Summit. I'm going to give folks maybe 30 more seconds to slowly trickle in. But for those of you who I have not yet met, my name is Kyla Pearce. I'm the Senior Director of Programs, Research, and Operations at Love Your Brain. And on behalf of our entire team, just incredibly honored to have you all joining us for our first ever Love Your Brain Summit. We have folks joining us from many different countries, many different time zones. So wherever you are, I hope you have brought along some water and some other resources to help kind of support yourself while we are together. We know the next 3 days will be an inspiring 3 days uniting science, a wealth of different holistic health approaches, and a lot of conversation about lived experience. And together, we believe that this will help change and shift the landscape of brain injury care. I am part of a panel today who will be discussing our session entitled Redefining What's Possible, Making Holistic Therapies Trusted and Accessible After Brain Injury. So I'm delighted to have Dr. Talin Babikian and Dr. Ivory Rose joining us, and we'll introduce them in a moment. But before we get started, would love to offer a little bit of a grounding practice, since I know many of you might be transitioning from work or supporting family or all the to-do lists, and really want to invite a little chance to pause and arrive together. So there's no way to do this wrong. I'll guide just for a minute or two, a little bit of opening our senses to what's right here. So as you're ready, you're welcome to either close your eyes or perhaps turn away from the screen and set your sights on something that brings you a little bit of steadiness or joy. And together, let's begin to gather our attention through the breath. So as you're ready, take a slow, intentional breath in, feel your lungs expand. And a slow, easy breath out, feeling a release. Good, one more time. Slow, intentional breath in, feel your lungs expand. Easy breath out, feeling a release. Let's begin to set your attention free to sense the sounds around you. It's becoming curious about the sounds in the distance, perhaps sounds outside of the room that you're in, the sounds closer by, even the sound of my voice arising and passing away. It's beginning to welcome sounds as they come to you, guiding your attention to your body, feeling its natural weight settling you into the surfaces beneath you. You might sense your seat on a chair or your feet on the floor, noticing the steadiness, the consistency. How might you allow yourself to settle a little more fully into this support? Each exhale releases you downward, settling, present. And you might also feel the earth rising up to meet you, to meet all of us gathered here together. Take a slow, intentional breath in again, and another easy breath out. And as best you can, imagine or sense a gentle smile curling along your lips. The subtle smile, the warmth and energy of the smile spreading across your face, even to lift the corners of your eyes. The smile spreading throughout your body, as a reminder of the goodness of your intentions of being here. There are many other places you could be right now, but you've chosen to be here. So honoring this choice of your genuine willingness to learn and to grow and to connect. Sending this appreciation outward to hold our entire group, people with lived experience of brain injury, caregivers, clinicians, yoga and meditation teachers, so many others coming here together. A deep welcoming to all parts of ourselves, all physical and mental abilities, all racial backgrounds, all sexual orientations, all gender identities and expressions. We see you and we welcome you. Again, an invitation to take a slow breath in. You might feel your heart lift a little higher. And an easy breath out. And just for a final moment, inquiring to yourself why you are here. If there's one word that captures the goodness of your intentions of being here, maybe it's curiosity, a desire to learn, to share part of your story, to inspire others. Just letting that be a bit of a guidepost as we move throughout the next few days together. Let's take a final breath for all of us to close. Again, slow breath in, pausing for a moment at the top. And then slowly letting it all go. And without any rush, you might take a little stretch or look around your space. And if you'd like, we'll invite everyone to perhaps share in the chat if there's one word that captures why you are part of the Love Your Brains Summit. The chat is at the bottom of the little Zoom toolbar, and I'll just name some of the ones that are coming through. Thank you, Karen, for starting us. Community, hope, connection, hope, resources, action, devotion, learning, support, acceptance, understanding, skills and information, patience, healing, belonging, curiosity, inspiration, purpose, relief, growth. Well, I'm having a touch of emotion seeing the just moving reasons you are all here. So feeling very blessed to have this community together. So I am going to now switch to sharing a few slides alongside of my amazing co-panelists and a few housekeeping reminders. We will keep people intentionally on mute to help limit any background noise. However, if you have any questions, also if you need any tech support, please use the chat and our team will respond as best we can. We have a really incredible team from Love Your Brain that has done so much to bring the summit to life. So know we're here to support. And also, if you miss any of the sessions, you can access the recordings within the Zoom lobby throughout the entire duration of the summit. And then there's opportunities to access it after, which we can, share more at the end. A big thank you to our sponsors, without whom this would not have been possible: the Ryan Blaney Family Foundation, V-Light, Neuromatrix, Red Sox Foundation, University of Vermont Health, and Stephen McDonnell. So I am joined by two incredible humans and clinicians and advocates. Talin Babikian is a neuropsychologist and associate professor in child and adolescent psychiatry at UCLA. Her research and clinical work focus on the neurodevelopmental impacts of TBI across the lifespan. Dr. Babikian contributes to multiple national TBI initiatives and publishes widely on neurorehabilitation and pediatric neuropsychology. Dr. Ivory Rose is an occupational therapist with over 20 years of experience, including working with individuals with brain injury. She serves as the lead for healthcare engagement at Social Prescribing USA and is a published author and speaker on social prescribing. A firm believer in holistic approaches to wellness, she uses poetry as a tool for self-expression as a form of advocacy for social change. So it's a delight to have you both with us. But first, a little bit more on the why. So we know that brain injury is common, complex, and chronic. 30% approximately of adults will experience a brain injury at some point in their life, and there is no FDA-approved treatment. So what this means is brain injury is dynamic and often persists in different capacities. We know the impact on mental health is very real. The risk of anxiety and depression nearly double after brain injury. There can also be impacts to our physical well-being, our mobility, ability to sleep, chronic pain. There can be cognitive impacts, executive functions, our ability to remember, pay attention, make decisions, as well as process sensory information. One of the most common and challenging impacts of brain injury is how lonely and isolating it can be. And also it can challenge us spiritually, redefining what a life of purpose and meaning looks like. And when someone experiences a brain injury, the care pathway has many different components. First, there must be recognition, an assessment of signs and symptoms to identify and validate that someone's had a brain injury. Then classification, assessment of the nature and severity to inform what are the services and supports that person needs. Some people will require acute care, medical interventions to help stabilize and mitigate ongoing impacts. Many will also need rehabilitation, interventions aimed at improving the multiple different components we just talked about: mental, physical, social, spiritual. Follow-up care is often essential. Continued engagement with the care system, knowing how dynamic the healing process is as emerging needs evolve. And really the ultimate goal is for anyone impacted by brain injury to be able to return and participate in their lives in a meaningful way, in their community life, in their home life, in their work or academic or other daily activities. And we know this care pathway often has many bumps. There can be miss or delayed diagnosis. There can be difficulty accessing specialized care. Rehab might focus only on one thing, but not address holistically all the impacts. People might find barriers accessing follow-up care. Due to insurance caps, there can be a loss of care completely. Oftentimes, there's also limited attention to care partners and families' needs. And knowing the chronic and dynamic nature of brain injury, how essential it is to have access to long-term and holistic services, yet it's often unclear what is trustworthy and where to go. So we know there's a lot of opportunity here. And this was the experience of the founders of Love Your Brain. I'm going to play a brief video that shows some of the genesis around what the founders experienced. I have tested the sound, but just a little heads up, if it comes out loud, you might want to adjust it. Okay, here we go.
That's a hard thing to wake up to, is being somebody that you're not.
American snowboarder Kevin Pearce remains in critical but stable condition tonight after a training accident yesterday in Park City, Utah.
I was there. I was at the very, very top of competitive snowboarding. And then in a split second, everything was taken away from me. I lost my abilities. I couldn't even stand up by myself. I couldn't even eat food by myself, much less was I going to go try and snowboard. And only your brain can do that to you. Only injuring your brain can change the person who you once were.
it's so grueling. It's so long. It's endless, the amount of challenges you're up against. Us seeing that if you could combine community and help people cultivate a mindset to navigate the uncertainty with an ability to reframe, this has to be something we can offer to more people.
And that is where the idea of Love Your Brain was formed.
Love Your Brain is a foundation with a mission to improve the lives of people affected by traumatic brain injury. From this, I've just learned that that change is inevitable, and it's not necessarily about the change, it's about how we respond to the change.
I was alone, and that's so internally damaging to feel that what you're experiencing is a problem. But when you join a community like Love Your Brain, you can hold your space of darkness, knowing that you're not alone, and knowing that, I have the skills and the community that's going to help me navigate whatever comes my way.
That's a hard.
So we have been around for about 10 years in an effort to develop a new model of holistic health programming for the brain injury community that centers a curriculum including trauma-informed mindfulness, yoga, psychoeducation, nutrition, with a strong emphasis on community building. We also build the capacity of healthcare facilities and clinicians to integrate more holistic methods into the continuum of care, and then contribute to research and outreach to really shape the scientific understanding of why a more holistic approach is essential to supporting the dynamic and ongoing impacts of brain injury. So we believe deeply that healing after brain injury doesn't stop, it evolves. And healing includes many different things. The body's repair mechanisms, interventions led by clinical professionals, and the behaviors you engage in that positively influence your well-being. So there are multiple facets. This model of wellness conveys that there are many different dimensions. And you might think about this for yourself, where you are in your life right now, as I name some of these. If there's perhaps one in your healing process that might be more of a focus right now. The idea is that they're all interdependent. Progress in one area nurtures progress in another. However, it is up to the individual to find the right balance that works for them. One dimension, emotional, our ability to understand and manage our emotions so that we can cope with what's difficult and also nurture what's positive. Social, building healthy relationships, cultivating a sense of belonging. Occupational, finding fulfillment in our daily activities, our chosen activities, which might include our work. Financial, having management of financial resources that supports our goals. Environmental, recognition that we're connected to the planet and that when we can occupy safe and supportive built and natural environments, that helps support our well-being and healing. Physical, how we care for our bodies, sleep, nutrition, exercise. Intellectual, engaging with our mind to experience creativity, learning new things, mastering new skills. And also spiritual, how we identify a sense of purpose and meaning in our lives and perhaps a connection to something larger. So we have designed the summit to have an incredible array of speakers who will be touching on these topics over the next 2 to 3 days and really looking at all of these through the lens of brain injury, the unique lens of brain injury, so that people can come away with more trusted and clear pathway forward. So our invitation is for you to explore these ideas. Healing doesn't happen during appointments alone. Holistic approaches offer tools people can practice and adapt in daily life. Holistic health after brain injury isn't about alternative care. These are modalities we'll be talking about that have a strong scientific background, and we know that the scientific enterprise is evolving. And in order to find innovation, someone has to be at the forefront of testing new things and trying new boundaries. And the most powerful healing happens where science meets lived experience. So where each of you interpret what feels right for you and let that wisdom let that wisdom guide your decision making. So our bold effort here is to support people with brain injury and caregivers to learn trustworthy and effective holistic resources that they can use tomorrow. Increase clinician adoption and referral to these modalities so that we can strengthen the care pathway and ensure that anyone impacted by brain injury can become more active participants in their healing process. So again, a massive thank you to all of you for being here, and would love to pass it over to you, Dr. Babikian.
Thank you so much. It really is a delight and an honor to be speaking to you, this amazing community that you've built over the last many years. What I'd like to do is give you some insights and some highlights of key concepts that I've collected over the 20 plus years or so that I've been working in this brain injury space, in the hopes of putting some ideas on the front burner for you to keep track of and be mindful of as you go through the next couple of days and as you listen to various perspectives and ideas about how to integrate the information you're learning and how to put together these elements in a way that's helpful in the professional work that you do or in the care of yourself or loved one with a brain injury. Clinicians, research clinicians, like where I started off, group individuals together, and then we track what some predictors are of the various outcomes that we're interested in. So yes, if we group a bunch of patients that we identify as having similar injuries, there are certain things we can identify. The more severe the brain injury, the more impacted the brain, the more interventions that are necessary early on, the longer someone's in a coma. Those are all factors that as a group predict long-term challenges. But the interesting element of this is that the farther we are from injury, the less these proximal medical factors are helpful in understanding how someone fares after an injury. And the more distal we get from the actual injury and its consequences, the more some of the elements you're going to hear about the rest of today and this whole weekend become really important. Meaning making, access to resources, our connections, our ability to engage in activities that bring joy to our life, the level that we can stay engaged in our community. When we look at children, it's parenting styles, resiliencies, all of these factors. The farther we get from the injury itself, the more important they become in predicting outcomes. Next slide. 20 years ago or so, when I was tasked with looking at all the literature to understand cognitive outcomes, I was very proud of this little figure we put together. And the story I used to tell is the more severe the injury, the more challenges one may have. On the milder end, there may be some cognitive difficulties at the beginning, but those patients can recover. Those kind of in that moderate severity level continue to show improvement and growth and development, but they may lag behind their peers. And then I would say in the severe group, even though there's some recovery of function and improvement in function, over time there's a big gap. And I would stop there, and I was very proud of this work that we'd done. About 5 years ago, after a lot of clinical experiences, I realized that this story was not quite right. And I would say currently I look at the story that I have been telling and I cringe. I cringe because when we look at groups of patients and we identify a pathway of their recovery and then assign that pathway to a given individual, we do that given individual disservice. So if you can click through the next few slides, you'll see that patients can start off on the milder end, have severe challenges, you can continue. We can have patients who are on the most severe end of the spectrum and show tremendous growth and recovery. You can continue. There's lots of arrows to be seen. All of this to say that individual recovery paths are so variable and so dependent on a number of things unrelated to the initial brain injury that are areas that can be modifiable, and that's the exciting part. The other way I've started talking to families and patients and trainees and clinicians about cognition is not all cognition is the same. In fact, there are very few things that can permanently impact the capacity of the brain to function. You can click through several of these. You'll see, for example, dementias, intellectual disability, catastrophic brain injury. These are all things that can potentially diminish the cognitive capacity of an individual. On the other hand, there's so many things that interfere with cognition. And I like that this list on the right side is long because these are all points of intervention. Mood, the physiology of a concussion, pain, migraine, dysautonomia, sleep dysregulation is a really, really important one that's often underappreciated. When the body doesn't get enough sleep, it's really hard for cognition, for mood, for pain management, for attention, for focus to be regulated. Medication side effects, stress, worry, fatigue, deconditioning, avoidance. It could be physical avoidance, social avoidance, cognitive avoidance, reinforced narratives that we tell ourselves, mismanagement, and misdiagnosis, a number of things that can interfere with cognitive functioning that, again, are reversible and points of intervention. Next slide, please. One other piece that I wanted to put on the table that is often, I think of as misleading dichotomies or artificial dichotomies. This idea of, is the physical symptom of physical or mental? Is it neurological or psychological? Is it organic or functional? While these groupings are helpful in putting parameters around what it is that we're describing or what it is that we want to intervene on, they misrepresent the biology. There's one nervous system and one brain. So our thoughts, our emotions, our sensations, our perceptions, our narratives, our biology, our cellular function, all of these things are tightly related. So when one aspect is challenged, it has a downstream effect on a whole host of things that are regulatory. And on the other hand, when we intervene and we align one of these things, so whether it's the sleep or the cognition or the thoughts or the narrative or the story, then we undo that spiral in a positive direction. Even things like genes versus environment, genetic contributions very much heavily are based on environmental triggers. Even the word biological psychiatry is challenging. There's no biology without the environment. There's no cellular function without that cell's environment. So keep this in mind as you take in the talks that you're going to hear in the next couple of days. Next slide, please. I've put a table together of evidence-based treatments, not only for brain injury, obviously the topic here is brain injury, but any nervous system restoration, regulation, rehabilitation. You'll see that on the two ends, the pharmacology, the medical end, and then the personal insight in terms of therapies, these get the most traction in our medical system, in our medical model. They get a lot of the funding and the resources, and they're very much important components of rehabilitation and restoration and regulation. But there's so much in the middle there that also has evidence-based, that doesn't require insurance payments, it doesn't require a clinic, it doesn't require funding, that and Kyla, you very nicely put into this idea of these are techniques and methodologies that are often called complementary or alternative, and there's nothing alternative or complementary if we look at the evidence-based, and they come in various buckets: rhythm, movement, lifestyle, mindfulness, engagement. The one I've highlighted at the bottom there, service to others. And while I want to make sure that I don't come across as tone deaf, because we know when patients have had a brain injury or families are having to care for a loved one with a brain injury, one of the last things they may want to hear is to, in their grief, is to go be of service to others. And at the same time, when it's the right time and it's the right opportunity, service to others is a very potent regulatory and rehabilitative measure. And sometimes these can be grand gestures, but many times they're not. It could be just opening doors for strangers or smiling at someone who may be looking like they have a hard day, helping a little kid or an older elderly person cross the street. So something else to keep in mind. And the final slide, you can stop here. I was tasked with identifying all of the elements that support well-being in young people. That's where I started. And nothing here is going to be surprising. And when we think about mental health or well-being of young people, yes, doing well in school, having strong social connections, having family support, being part of whatever community they're interested in, all of these predict well-being. On the other hand, adverse childhood experiences, physical disabilities, complicated medical situations, having a learning disability, all predict challenging well-being or mental health. What was striking, though, is regardless of what's in this bubble, if I can have you maybe tap 2 or 3 so that we can get our pillars. All of these components, again, this is for children. We can substitute for adults. We may have things like being financially set, having nurturing adult relationships, having good relationships with people. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, all of the components that go in this bubble are filtered down to 2 pillars. And if I can have you tap through those 2. The first is a sense of safety and agency. We all need that for well-being. Safety is obvious. Agency does not necessarily mean control. There's very few things we can control in our life, but a sense of agency that's really key in this context is having some path that we know we can implement, that we have some say over things we can do to change or improve our situation. That's one pillar. The other pillar is purpose, connection, and belonging. If you want to nerd out with me a little bit, the safety and agency are all sympathetic kinds of qualities. Purpose, connection, and belonging are the parasympathetic. I'm going to have you tap one more time. I'm going to give you a story before I pass this on. Before I started working in brain injury, I spent some time, a few years, understanding risk factors internationally in young people on risk-taking behaviors as it related to HIV and other acquired diseases. So we were in Eastern Europe, we were in South America, parts of Africa, North America, and as you can imagine, in the Caribbean as well, as you can imagine that the risk profiles of these youngsters really varied across these socio-demographic and economic societies, with one exception, which was very poignant at the time. If young people were able to identify one adult in their life that they felt cared for them, this idea of connection, they were at lower risk for participating in behaviors that would put them at risk. And it didn't matter who the adult was. Sometimes it was a biological parent, but many other times it was a grandparent, a coach, a priest or pastor, an uncle, a teacher, etc. So this idea of connection at the time was planted in me. And over the years, whenever it's studied, it's important in rehabilitation, in recovery, in mental health, in well-being, in resilience. So I wanted to put that on the table as you hear our next speaker discuss this construct a little bit more and how it pertains to the work of brain injury. Thank you.
Hi there, this is Ivory Rose. Thank you so much, Dr. Talin. That was a wonderful presentation, and thank you for the segue. I'm Dr. Ivory Rose. I'm an occupational therapist and also lead for healthcare engagement at Social Prescribing USA, as you heard. And I'm here to talk to you about social prescribing. And if that's a term that's new to you, don't worry. It is new to most people in the United States. But we will get into what it is, why it's important, and how does it fit into modern clinical practice, and how can it fit into the life of someone after brain injury. As we talked about already, the lack of social contact is one of the greatest burdens reported by people with traumatic brain injury. And we know that having a lack of social support or feeling lonely puts people at risk for a lot of different complications of their health in general. So people that have a brain injury and have a greater risk of social isolation tend to be less socially active. People with brain injury have a greater risk of being isolated. So just to make a quick distinction between being isolated and being lonely. So being isolated means that someone is alone, and that's something that we could kind of objectively measure. Being lonely is that subjective feeling, that emotional state of feeling lonely. Okay, so I just want to kind of make that distinction. But we do know that people with brain injury have a greater risk of being socially isolated for a whole kind of array of reasons. That can lead to being less socially active, having less friendships. Often there's that kind of rush of social support right at the time of a brain injury, right immediately after a brain injury. There's that big rush of social support. And then with time, that often really fades. And people may find themselves with less friendships or less social activity for really a wide variety of reasons. And with that also is being less integrated into the community over time. And someone that is socially isolated and or lonely after a brain injury has a higher risk of having worse health outcomes in general. So that can mean more likely to have morbidities and also mortality. So worse health outcomes overall. Oh, if we could just go back. Thank you. People that are lonely or isolated would be more likely to feel depressed, have PTSD, have a slower recovery, and have reduced functional abilities overall. And we know that even without brain injury, loneliness and social isolation is a big health risk factor. So it's not just for people with brain injury, although it's especially important for people after brain injury. So this is the definition of social prescribing, which is an international definition that people across the globe got together and did a research process to come up with this definition through a Delphi study. And the definition is that social prescribing is a means for trusted individuals in clinical and community settings to identify that a person has non-medical health-related social needs and to subsequently connect them to non-clinical supports and services within the community. So what does that mean? that means that someone comes to the healthcare system with something that is affecting their health, but that is a social need. So it could be loneliness, isolation, and we know that that's impacting their greater health. So the healthcare system has come up with kind of a pathway to support people with connecting to their community and taking part in those meaningful activities that we know impact health. So the healthcare system is, in a sense, linking someone to community supports, and that's what social prescribing is. So this is a diagram. Social prescribing is a term for the whole pathway. So it's not just the community group that someone takes part in as a result of their prescription, but it's the whole pathway of someone in the healthcare system helping the person identify that there is a need that is social. Because we know that 80 to 90% of what affects our health is what happens outside of doctors' offices, right? And Kyla made a wonderful reference to this in the opening, about that health really happens outside of doctors' rooms and outside of appointments, I think is how she worded it. And that's such a great point, and really that is the foundation of social prescribing. That if we know that 80 to 90% of our health is impacted by what happens outside of the doctor's office, then let's find a way for health insurance companies to support people to engage outside of the doctor's office. So the first step in that is identify. So the healthcare professional would help someone identify a need, which I referred to. The next step is connect. So the healthcare professional themselves may not have the time to spend one-on-one with someone to find what is that meaningful community resource or group that could really support their wellness. So therefore, they often use someone that specializes in community connection. And that person could be referred to as a link worker, as a community connector. And their job is to really spend that one-on-one time with the person and connect them with community resources. So together, they will co-create. So the person with a brain injury and the connector would co-create a social prescription. And that could vary amongst a variety of different activities, which we'll get to on the next slide. But that person helps them find a meaningful group or activity in the community and then refers them to engage at the level of the community. And this is something that has been done somewhat in traditional healthcare. But what's unique about social prescribing is really providing extra support to help the person get to that community activity. So if you think of the barriers that keep people from getting out in the community and taking part in what's meaningful to them, we know that things like the cost of attendance is a barrier. We know that transportation is a barrier, and that can be linked to financial deficits, or it could be linked to not having an accessible vehicle, needing support with how to navigate taking a bus from a cognitive point of view. And so the link worker really supports the person in any barriers. And then the person would go to that community group or activity and take part. And another important part of this kind of loop is you'll see there's a feedback loop where the person that takes part in the community activity, their progress will be measured. How is this impacting their social health? How's it impacting their loneliness, their well-being, their depression, anxiety, etc.? And that information is then shared back with the connector or the identifier. So it's really this loop of information. Now, the types of things that can be prescribed can vary from basic needs, so support with things like housing and food that are often supported by a social worker here in the US. It could also be things like job training, learning a language that would fall under the category of education and vocational training. Could be things like support groups, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous, or something called meaningful social activities. And I put a little star there because that is really kind of the emphasis of what we'll talk about. So I love this quote: people's everyday activities are the basis for how they feel about themselves and determine their relationships with others. So you can see people out in the community taking part in different activities that bring meaning to their life, that connect them with their community and with other people. And there are kind of 5 main pillars of prescriptions within that meaningful activity category. And those are art, movement, nature, service, which Dr. Talin has really touched on all of these, and social connection. And so these can be interwoven, definitely. And so you can see here that nature could be getting outside, taking a nature walk. There's a place close to me that just started free accessible motorized wheelchairs that are available in a local park, and people can go access the local park using a free motorized wheelchair. So that's an example of kind of making sure that someone is fully supported in engaging in nature and really meeting their needs. Service, so giving back to the community, could be through volunteering. Art, this is a big emphasis, I would say, in the United States. The pillar that's getting the most attention in social prescribing is the art prescribing. And there are a lot of programs that provide art prescriptions. Also movement. So there's movement-based groups, things like yoga and dance and walks are all within that movement category. And then also social connection. So building relationships through group activities. So these are really the 5 pillars of meaningful activity in social prescribing. And it's important to make a distinction from what we've done typically in clinical care. So I'm an occupational therapist, and up until fairly recently, I worked in a home health setting, so visiting people in the home when they're homebound. And we had a nearby adaptive swimming, a pool that had some adaptive swimming programs. And sometimes, if the person was able to get out and about into the community when they graduated from home health services and no longer were getting home health, occupational or physical therapy, we would sometimes recommend that they go to the adaptive swimming. And that's helpful, but it's not the full support of social prescribing. So part of the full support is having this individualized support and asking someone, instead of what's the matter with you, what matters to you, and really making sure that it's individualized. Because for one person, adaptive swimming might be wonderful and meaningful, and for another person, that might not be meaningful to them. Also, assistance with barriers, which I touched on before, kind of navigating those barriers that keep people from getting out into the community. Support for motivation, how to stay motivated, how to approach this, how to initiate to get out into the community is also a key part of the social prescribing process. And co-production. So we talked about agency, right, with Dr. Talin. Co-production means the participant is really an equal partner in determining what that meaningful social prescription is, whether it's an adaptive gardening group or whether it is a pottery class or yoga, whatever is meaningful to that person is really important. Kate Mulligan is the founder, of the Canadian Institute for Social Prescribing, and she's also the mother of Orla, who had a brain injury at age 9. And she wrote a wonderful article about the impact of social care and social prescribing in her own daughter's journey through brain injury. And she said social prescribing shifts the focus from patients as passive recipients of care to people as active agents of change. And I demonstrate this picture because the 3, even just the body language, the way the 3 people are centered towards each other, shows that this client and their family member or caregiver and the healthcare provider are all kind of equal partners in the social prescribing process in finding out what is that meaningful activity. Some outcomes of social prescribing after brain injury, keep in mind that there are a variety of different things that can be prescribed, which makes research challenging because one person could be taking part in swimming, someone else could be taking part in adaptive surfing, someone else could be taking part in an art group. So measuring all those changes is measuring a lot of different things. And so just keep in mind that that is a challenge for research when you want to research social prescribing in general. But we know that we could look at some of those individual categories and look at the research behind that. And this is so well tied into what Dr. Talin just shared with us, that being a part of a community group has been shown to improve well-being for people with brain injury. Taking part in an art group has been shown to improve well-being, life satisfaction, and reduce depressive symptoms. We also know for veterans that have had traumatic brain injury, there's some research on the impact of service. And that has shown a decrease in loneliness, decrease in PTSD symptoms, and improved overall health and increased self-efficacy. So that's a kind of one study in particular. We also have studies on the impact of adaptive surfing that shows improved sense of belonging, decreased stress, improved mood, well-being, and improved management of emotions. And then another group that is a combination of creative arts, cooking, and nature, because all of those domains can definitely overlap. So not only do they impact each other, but they also overlap with each other. So this group for people with brain injury demonstrated improved sense of belonging, decreased anxiety, improved confidence, and improved well-being. There are social prescribing programs throughout the United States. You can go to www.socialprescribingusa.com to click on those and interact and read more, go to their websites and learn more about those. Some examples of groups for people with acquired brain injury include furniture restoration group, community art, martial arts, inclusive cycling and surfing, memory groups, Tai Chi, art groups, and green woodworking. So just take a quick moment and reflect on an activity that you liked to do when you were younger. And maybe it's something that you still do today, or maybe it's something that you haven't done for a while. But I invite you to share that in the chat. What's an activity that you like to do when you were younger? There was a question about Canadian services. Yes, so there is another map of Canada. There's actually social prescribing around the world. And I'm here speaking on behalf of social prescribing in the United States, but you're absolutely right. There's social prescribing in many countries around the world. And I love seeing all these wonderful activities come through. So think about if you were to prescribe yourself a meaningful activity to improve your well-being, what that could be. Would it be the same thing you did as a child, maybe? And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So if you would need support to take part in something, if that's been a challenge to continue taking part in the activity that you've named in the chat, which there's such a beautiful variety, identify one person that could help you. Maybe it's a family member, a friend, a caretaker, maybe it's an occupational therapist that you could go and say, I really want to get back into, I'm going to take Crystal's example, baking, and asking them for support to find a group, a community group where you could take part in that. Talk to your healthcare providers, share the term social prescribing, say, I just learned about this and I want to have this as part of my care because this is a new practice in the United States and we need you as advocates to advocate for social prescribing so that it continues to expand. Visit a group in the community, visit a baking group and see if it's a good match and give it 3 tries. Give yourself a 3 tries guideline that I'm going to try this group 3 times because it might not click on the first time. Okay. And I'm now going to share with you a quick poem about social prescribing, and that will be wonderful. I see Lupita is an advocate already. That's wonderful. This is called Less and More. We sleep less, scroll more, touch less, text more. We spend less time outdoors and more time under fluorescent lights. We look at the stars less and screens more. We see less stars even when we are looking. We set more timers and attempt to be more productive. We visit more doctors for our health. The doctors spend less time with us because they have to see more patients. We live in places with more people, yet feel less connected and more lonely. We spend more, yet we are less happy. We listen to social media experts more and to our own bodies less. We suffer more anxiety and therefore talk to strangers less, not knowing that talking to strangers more may actually lead to more happiness. We judge ourselves more and often believe in ourselves less. We are more alone and less in community. So what if we flip the script? What if we moved more and watched TV less? What if we spent more time actually in green places and less time just making pictures of them into our screensavers? What if we spent more time cooking and more time eating and less lunch breaks cramming? What if we helped each other more, even when we didn't think it was going to benefit us? Side note, science says it secretly does benefit us as long as we're not doing it just for that reason. What if we spent more time together and less time in our silos? And what if we stopped waiting until we had more health problems before thinking about our health? What if we did more of what actually makes us well and looked less to doctors and more to ourselves as the experts in our own health? What if we looked more to nature and art and movement and eating healthy food and helping each other and being in community? And what if instead of just paying for more doctor's visits and more pills, which do have their time and place, what if our health insurance actually paid for more of what creates our health? Like going to poetry night, or pottery class, or riding horses in the park, or dance group, or stand-up comedy class for men who have survived a suicide attempt. Or even things that don't cost money, like walks in the park or volunteering. Well, in over 30 countries around the world, healthcare systems are actually paying for these things, and it's called social prescribing. So I ask you one final question. What if we looked less into bottles of pharmaceuticals for the answers and more into our own communities?
Thank you so much, Dr. Rose. I hope you're seeing the hearts and claps and appreciations that you're receiving from this group. And also thank you, Talin Babikian, for everything you contributed. And some of the words that are really standing out to me is this idea of agency. There's so many things we can't control, and yet there are small choices that we can make that really make a big difference. So I hope you can take that little gem with you into the next 2 days and just find one thing that resonates and lands with you that you can bring in and integrate into your life. So thank you also very much for your attention, your willingness to be here, for the questions that have already come through, and look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. We'll be starting both Saturday and Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern and ending at 6 p.m. Eastern. There will be a session every hour. We'll try to end a few minutes before to give a little bit of transition time. But if you go into your Zoom lobby, you can actually create a personalized schedule and select the sessions you might be interested in if that helps. And until then, until then, I hope you all have a moment to pause and do something that brings you a smile between now and when we see you tomorrow. So feel free to take yourself off mute to say bye, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you all so much, everyone. Bye.
Have a good night.
Have a good night. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Great
Bye.
presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.